Hey teachers, Haley here at Teacher's Pet, and I'm back for video number 2 in our summer kind of course series where I am doing a little show and tell, and we are unpacking my spring 2025 2000 level, very like kind of project writing based course that I use a lot of non-traditional like ideas, structures. It followed some ungrading practices. If you have, questions, need some inspiration, just interested in checking out how one of many ways you could set up an ungraded class. That is kind of what the series is all about. Now, if you missed video number 1 in the series, I have it linked for you, but basically it was just some context on what the class was, what it was about. You didn't miss too much, don't worry, but you can definitely go back and watch that to see essentially the course overview video that I gave to students with a little bit more on what the plan is and why I created this series. Now, I am an assistant teaching professor with a 4-4 load at an R2 university, and so this class that I'm breaking down as my show and tell, I had 3 sections of this particular class in the spring semester with, about like 50 odd students in it because we were a fairly small university. In this video, we are going to be diving into the overall structure of my class. And so I'm just going to show you really how I organize sort of the topics and the weeks, kind of a big picture look at what my Canvas shell, how it was set up in terms of the home page, and then also some of the tools that I used, which are available through Teacher's Pet as well. Just to help me with that structure. Last we go through my syllabus page and how I set up the Canvas syllabus with just a few ideas that maybe you want to implement in your own classes or just spark some interesting thoughts as you might be redesigning and getting ready, right, to prep some new classes over the fall semester. All right, I'm really excited about it, and I'm going to flip kind of my camera angle. We're going to hop into my legit actual Canvas shell over in Student View and start looking through the course structure and syllabus. All right, so in this first course tour, I'm here in my student view, so that way we can go through my actual Canvas shell with the way that students were seeing it. And with this first video, we're really going to focus in on the overall structure of just how I set up the shell, as well as the syllabus. Now, toggling over real quick to my course eval sheet and some of the comments. And so, our first sort of set of questions, were really about kind of that structure and just the content of the course. And so, with the organized effectively, I had a 5.78 out of 7, which I honestly thought it would be higher. I really thought I crushed organizing these materials. There's no way that they're going to be confused. But, I still have people disagreeing that it was organized. So, we'll definitely continue to think about how we could map that. But I really thought, man, this is the semester. Everyone's going to love it. And to be fair, most people did say that they were quite organized, which is great. We'll talk about materials and graded assignments in future videos in this series, as well as overall kind of thoughts on how that all came together. So for now, let's talk about how and what did contribute to this, overall pretty strong sort of course organization score, that medium way up there, nice and high, which, the median score is in some ways a little bit more valuable to me just because it does, I think, better often represent how, right, most of my people, my students were thinking about it. So most people, thought it was pretty organized. Now, it is funny, during one of the comments as we were going through, again, people said, okay, different materials, I did understand it was thorough, clear, but under my things that could be improved, I did have this particular one student saying, the structure of the class was really confusing. It was hard to know what needed to be read, watched, and such, and just what needed to be done in class. And that one, again, really stands out to me because, to be honest, y'all, I am confused why the student was so confused. So let me just show you a little tour of the class, and you can decide and let me know in the comments if you're like, I totally understand why you got this comment. So why I thought, okay, I have designed this class structure to be like confusion proof. And some of the ways I did that on my homepage, we do have a weekly checklist. And so every single week, basically every Friday afternoon at the end of the week, I would update this with, hey, here's where we are in the class schedule. Here's kind of the, whatever number of week. Here's what we're going to be talking about. Here is, like any assignments got basically linked in here. So since this was during finals week, it's like, okay, and this takes you to the module for it. Here's the assignments that were due. Like I would literally link, here's your reading, here is your lab activity, here is your homework, like your quiz, like I literally linked it every single week, gave them any special notes. And then I also posted this video, this kind of weekly short that they would watch, where I would just talk them through, exactly here's what we're going to do this week. Here's what you're reading and why you're reading it. Here's what we're going to do in lab and why. By the way, don't forget your project's due in, 2 weeks, whatever it was. And so I gave all of that information, really thinking like, okay, if nothing else, they have a literal checklist of what's due this week. But, obviously people still, we're not quite getting it. So I do want to think about how to adjust that. Definitely open to ideas on there. So after the weekly checklist for the structure, then I had things like PAL. And so with Teacher's Pet, you are able to build your own PAL. It's a little chat bot that can actually help you help your students. And so they had access to my little PAL chat that was trained fully on my course materials. Really love that. Recommend checking out with our new trial kind of tier. So that way you could build one chat bot of your own. I have the syllabus as a quick link, how to get to office hours, which was an online link. And then I did have an extra FAQ page. After that, I organized it just on a week-to-week breakdown with here's your lectures that you will read online, here's your writing labs. And so with this kind of table structure, right, each one is labeled, and as the weeks went on, I would, activate the new links. So really they just had to go to the most recent active link, and that was, the activities due this week. And then I had my project area on the home page where they could click through all the different project options. At the bottom, then I just have all sorts of, tech tools, guides, kind of quick links to try and help them out. That was kind of the structure of my home page. In terms of the module structure, so I do know a lot of students like to go to the modules. I just used a general unit based structure. And so just because I thought that weekly kind of got a little bit messy. So for example, right when they're in unit 1, they had all the projects for the unit listed at the top. And so maybe that is a place where, that was confusing if somebody was only going to the modules. But when they scroll down just a little bit, then there's the weekly materials in week 2, 3, 4, with all of the readings, the lab assignment, the doc analysis was just a little homework. Again, we'll talk about it in participation later in the series, and the reading quiz. So everything was kind of just there week by week. So that was my kind of macro level structure that I was focused on, that I built into this class. And I truly thought, this is going to be great. They're going to crush it. They're going to love it. And mostly people did like it and love it. But I am just like, how did you not know what to do each week? Like, you just click on, these, but that's okay. So in terms of like the overall structure, then I did want to, and like how I figured out how that structure would go. I actually created this course building kind of spreadsheet. And this is how I stopped to set up what the overall, that macro level structure in terms of the topics of the class was going to look like, and kind of keeping this all together. And so I start out with my learning outcome matrix. And this is where I literally go through and I like to paste in my course description every time I start to build a class. That way I can keep that official description in mind. And then I go through and I start to figure out, okay, like what is it that I want to do? What are those learning outcome verbs at the highest order, which then helps me align everything else in my structure. So for this class, and I don't know why it's a little bit like messed up like that, but I wanted them to be able to, recognize common technical genres based on these standards. They needed to be able to integrate, right, document design elements to enhance and make useful, usable, enjoyable products. They needed to practice project management strategies. They needed to generate ethical and research-driven decisions, and I employed that in a bunch of projects we'll see. They needed to interpret the rhetorical situation for a project, and finally, they needed to be able to assess the quality of their own documents, with critical self-reflection and a growth mindset. So every then topic and module and concept built from that. And I literally mapped those things out, kind of down here with, okay, different modules. Here's basically, all of those core skills and the ways that I would need to address and what I need to think about to ensure we reach that kind of core skill. So for example, for them to be able to, recognize specific genres, I need to have them be able to, list expected elements and, create things like outlines with those elements and be able to I need to give them examples of these, and that realization, okay, for them to learn the specific genres, I need to give them examples of those genres, led to things like my weekly homework for the document analysis project. And so this was sort of my module to outcome map that I really like to use to kind of start building the overall structure. And then I also map out things like all of the projects that I was thinking about giving to the students. This is kind of was in my early stages, going through and saying, okay, would this assess, which one of these sort of key outcomes, would it not, and just kind of quickly mapping that out. So this kind of page of the spreadsheet is just helpful and more of a brain dump space for me to stop and check that I am focused on the outcomes, and being, reliable in sort of what I'm creating. Then I go into my overview tab, which is where I actually would lay out the schedule and course structure for my class. And so I personally always like to start with my calendar view, just making sure all the dates are there. And then I just spent a bunch of time, right, dragging and dropping and being like, wait, what if we don't do that here? And what if I, introduce this one here instead of, that one? There. And I love using Excel kind of in that way because of that drag and drop features. That just really helped me play around with some different things, iterate on it. A big thing that comes from just technical writing as well is, don't get too caught up in a single loop of what you're creating and acting like you just need to move forward because that's what you started with. Instead, it's okay, let me just try this. If it doesn't work, no worries. I'll just swap some things out and iterate until I finally came up with this schedule that I liked. So in that macro structure, what my schedule ended up really being here was an onboarding week and an offboarding week. So it was, intro to the class, always, that's standard. You probably do that as well. They reviewed the syllabus and left comments on it. And then our in-person was really just introductions and stuff. It was extra annoying actually for me because two of my classes were on a Monday and my institution had a holiday on that very first week on Monday. And so I had to kind of do some work since those students wouldn't get that class section, unfortunately. So I had my onboarding stuff. Then I started to figure out, okay, about 4-ish weeks per unit, and we had 3 main units. I liked to start mine with what is that key verb that then I can attach back to those learning outcomes. So for me, it was, describing technical content, which also really plays into their recognizing genres and being able to make this useful, usable, stuff for people as a baseline. And then, supporting user actions went right into, learning outcome 3 and 4, and then reporting kind of data also goes into kind of that research mindset there. Then within all of my kind of core units and having to work around spring break, that's where, I just went through and said, what is, the main sort of content, of course, you figure out your materials. That's nothing novel or interesting. I went and found that case study essentially, or example that they would analyze each week to correspond with what they were reading about. And then I'd figure out, what activities we were going to do in our one lab session. Now, the hardest part for me is not so much like figuring out this part, because it is somewhat standardized since this particular class is part of that gen ed core, and a lot of faculty in my department have to teach it, and we need to be consistent. So we don't have a lot of room in terms of, the topics, of course. So really the work here is more just what order, and always having to figure out where spring break lands or fall break lands when I prep it for the fall. And then the project submission deadlines, which are really tough for me as well. But I've kind of gone with this new structure of always giving them what I call a project check week at the end of the unit. So we can see there's group 1, group 2, and group 3, and they don't have any new materials, no new lectures, no new doc analyses. And the in-person lab is really a review and kind of open lab time. With that intention of you don't have your regular homework because you should be finishing up, your projects for that group. And instead of reading, come meet with me in my office. And I did have quite a few students schedule their office chats with me during that week. And we would review, their drafts and make sure that they could get that finished. So that is something that I'm going to continue doing, and, just making sure to have kind of these nice open weeks when things are due. I found that pretty useful. And then we had finals week. So the last thing that's in my spreadsheet that helps me figure out the structure, build my courses, is just my kind of assignment tally. As you can see, it's sort of out of this amount of points, and actually in the end of the semester ended up being out of 73 or 75 points because I had a few extra little random bonus things that I ended up adding in actuality in there. And so I just like to keep track of the assignment names, obviously. For me, I went with, again, this batch structure in terms of when they're due. So for my students, we'll get into it when we show and tell on the project specifically, but that overall structure is they are going to choose which of the projects they want to complete for that group. They are not expected, and in fact, it's designed so they really can't, it's a lot of work, do all of them. And so I laid that groundwork of no, I want you to choose which ones you have time for, interest in, and which ones align most to your career goals. And I spent a lot of time trying to tailor the assignments to be a little bit more focused for my engineering students versus ones a little bit more tailored and focused for my computer science students that make up 90% of the majors in this class. So all of those due dates were the same day to force them to kind of choose. And then there's a few things like the big report, they do one or the other big report if they chose to do it at all. And so having these merge cells to indicate those elements. Same with my video projects. So from each group, hey, decide what you want to do. Do you want to do 2 small projects, that equal 1 medium project? Do you want to do a medium project plus a small project to equal a big project? Or do you just want to focus on the big project for this unit? And then I had some of these just sort of general projects that contributed to their overall score, but not necessarily their individual group scores. So I definitely found this helpful to lay out all of this, and this went through a lot of different iterations and revisions as well. Because I also do this thing called prep tracking in it, where it's just a spreadsheet that is all color coordinated because I love, being visual, that actually lets me, keep track of everything that I am doing from, did I make my lectures? Do I have all my assignments ready to go? And by the end, it tells you how much of a completion score you've got. So if any of that is like interested and you also like to just organize things in color-coded spreadsheets, you can head over into the planner shop at Teacher's Pet, look at the trackers kind of side, and I do have my course builder and prep tracking sheet there that you can download. And basically, once you download the zip file, you'll get an Excel sheet as well as a Google Sheets. So whichever system you prefer using. If you're going to use the Google Sheets, then you'll just need to go File and make a copy for yourself, into your drives. That way you can start editing it. But within that, I have a little front page checklist of just, things. And obviously you can edit those tasks to align with what you want. I just put the ones that help me, things like making sure I audit materials, check for universal design, that kind of stuff. My overview page, right, has, for now I have it kind of filled out for what maybe your fall and spring 2026 semester dates would look like, but you'll obviously want to update that, especially for things like when your semester starts. And then after that, there's, a lot of, formulas in there to help you calculate your, project point totals and all that kind of stuff. So it's just a template to keep track of things. It has the learning outcome matrix. Again, it's color coded so you can see when you're introducing, practicing, and assessing. And then I have the prep tracker set up for you as well. And so as you, go through and mark things as complete and published, and you are just making your progress in your class, it actually will update these little status bars over here so you can see, week by week, or however you like to set up your spreadsheet, how far you are progressing, as well as your overall, like, are you done with your class? And if something isn't applicable, then that also, helps you kind of come up with that. All right, back to it's a whole side thing, but that is how I like to build out the structure of my class, so you might like to go in and look at. Okay, so let's look at the syllabus really quick. Obviously, the document that explains the structure of the class. So in my we use Canvas as my LMS, and so I have my syllabus page, which I kind of create in Canvas as what I call right there, TLDR, too long didn't read, key points, with some of these main headings. But then, of course, they need to download the actual syllabus. And I do, in that week one, have an assignment where they actually leave questions and annotations on the syllabus. So that way I can check off that, they actually read it. And that's, just syllabus is a syllabus. I do like to add, little cartoons of me and, try to add more tables and that kind of stuff. So that way I think it's like a little bit more interesting for them to read. But again, I do have an assignment during week one where they have to read and leave 3 comments, and, try to get them sort of set up that way. So within my course, like syllabus LMS, I like to, the main headings that I chose to pull out, or like to pull out that I tried to maybe guess they would be interested in. I don't know. Course description, right? And I just kind of rewrite it to be like, hey, what are, just like the basics, kind of plain language. Describe it in the same way that I describe it to my parents when I'm like, hey, I'm prepping this new class, or I'm teaching this class. And they're like, what's it about? And I'll be like, oh, well, I'm teaching the basics of technical writing and information design, blah, 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 blah. But then I do like to have these little accordions that open up, the official description. So I have my description versus, what the UCCS or the university catalog has to say. And then I do requirements and expectations. Again, all this is in the PDF syllabus. I just literally copy over the elements that I think are most important for them to reference later, and making sure that they stop on, what are those prereqs, telling them, about the class structure, standard, I think. What I think, or what I don't see as often, I don't find as standard, but, people in my comments, some of the things that they said they really liked, that was helpful, was that they, that they, liked how I kind of made it, right, like professional, real world problems, right? We're kind of going in there, how things related directly, making sure things made sense. Like really felt like there's a big theme with the comments as well as just how I interacted with them all semester, that they really liked knowing exactly how and what and why we were doing with that professional lens. And yes, there's certainly conversations to be had about the over professionalization of academics. Definitely, I get that. I hear that. And also meeting them where they're at. And in an intro level, very technical writing is a very professionalized field anyway. I think it's better to give them very clear language and examples. And so, under my learning outcomes, even though I, of course, had all those much more major learning outcomes for the class that are like listed in other documents and on like every project and everything. I also broke it down into like the big three, which was understand. So do you have agency and decision making? Why do you need to practice that? How are you going to practice it? So you'll show this skill by reading the content and taking action focused notes. Like this is why I'm assigning readings to you. Here's actually what you're practicing. Can you understand and then make decisions based on that information? And then I had this little use it box of like, hey, if you're in an interview or whatever, you could say in my tech comp class, we got videos, research articles, scenarios, all these labs discussions. Like my notes weren't just from memorizing stuff. They were a game plan for what to do next. This skill lets me prioritize tasks, move, projects forward, just trying to feed them some language so they understand what it is that they're learning outside of just the topics that they're learning. So I did that with, tech literacy and adaptability. And again, being like, yeah, you're going to use a bunch of tools to create your projects. Here's why. Here's how you can talk about this experience in more professional scenarios. And then last, creating, really boiling it down to you need to create these kind of complicated projects to actively practice your project management and complex task tracking and completion with, again, some language that they should be thinking about and invoking and trying to practice. So that way they knew exactly what the point of everything was. So that section, grading policies, the grading, we'll talk about it way more in the project day, but basically instead of a percentage, it was, again, choose your own adventure and earn points. And so I did have it essentially like, hey, this class is graded like a video game. You'll earn points, think XP, by completing the assignments, think quests. To level up by the end, of the session, you get to choose what quests are worth your XP and time. They're all worth different. Do you want a big project or a medium plus a small or just a small? It was up to them. Every 10 points, level them up one letter grade. Reaching the top level requires a balanced skill tree. Again, video game language. A lot of them are like, I understand that. But in practical terms, that meant that they did need to get at least 40 total points spread over every project category, which was actually 4 points per project area, qualified them for an A. So really it was be a jack of all trades in this class, but also, be like decently good at all of the trades that you're practicing. So I had that kind of explained in there. And so yeah, it says, A equals 40 points, 4 points in every skill group. B plus is if you have 40 points, but you skipped a whole unit and just, still managed to get 40 points, and so on down. And then I also like to put instructor info, some photos, right? Little things about me just to remind them I am a person. And I do link my LinkedIn profile so they can go creep on me, creep on me professionally if they want. A few, things about, my life, photos of me, my spouse, little like tidbits about me, and then favorite things, which, I'm just like, hey, I am more than just a random professor that stands in front of you. I am also a person, and definitely some students that came to my office hours were like, oh, I also like to, play City Skylines or whatever. So that was really nice, and I, to give them links. I like to do my Spotify Wrapped. I feel like that is one of the more like realistic intimate details I feel like you can give about yourself. Kind of embarrassing, but also I don't know, I think it's kind of the times, and true, it's like a very just that's I don't know, it's what I listened to, you know, that year. I don't know what to tell you. And then I just end my syllabus page with learner support. I have my AI policies in here, and I also, you know, give them examples of exactly how I want them to cite and disclose their use of AI, because in my class I do allow them to use it, and we go through with every project and throughout the semester really focusing on how to use it, why they could use it here and not here, and trying to have a little bit more of that lens, how to use it so it's productive and not just generating empty kind of brain space garbage, because, you know, the better your prompts, the better the outputs, and we still need to go through and enhance and change and revise and check a lot of stuff. And so I do let them use it, but I just explain very clearly the expectations around their usage, other resources, and then various policy statements before it goes into the course summary. So that is kind of my structure and syllabus. And if you want a syllabus page, if you want this, I have it for free over at the Teacher's Pet shop in the freebie section. I actually have the syllabus HTML template. So if you download that template page, you actually will get access just to this text file. So what you'll do then is Control C to copy all the HTML code for it. Copy that, go back into your, you know, LMS. And so then when you go to a new page, so like on my syllabus, hit edit, go to the HTML editor, and you can just paste in directly that HTML code. And then it will give you kind of all of that base content, which you can go in and edit. And so you'll be able to, from your regular editor in Canvas, you know, update all of this content. You know, you can add your links to the various stuff that's being, you know, promoted, change any of that as well. Now, if you aren't super crazy about, you know, the color scheme, of course, it's Teacher's Pet colors. We also have this HTML preview editor that you can go in and paste that code, and then this allows you to change the colors of all of the boxes by using the color code glossary, so that way you can, you know, just like create and immediately, you know, see the difference. And so maybe if your school is a green and gold school, then you can find all these different color codes and update it so that way it's a green box instead of a yellow box, you know, for example. And in our resource library, I actually wrote a blog post about all of these HTML, some favorite elements in Canvas, that you can also, you know, check out just for a little bit of help and support there. All right, so thank you for watching, right, this series, my show and tell, where we are just unpacking and diving deep into this course. Next week, next video, we are going to start getting into some of the actual graded elements, and so we'll focus first on how I handled participation in this kind of ungraded, you know, like a video game XP system. So join me next Friday for that. You know, grab all of these tools if you want them in the shop. Drop a comment below this video with like something about how you structured your course that you loved, or maybe how you would do it differently. Just tell me all about your course structures. And until then, I hope that you have a great class, or a great time maybe rebuilding your class if you are off for the summer break. Bye.